Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's...
Have you ever wondered how even those stories about chosen ones, like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, Clary Frey from Cassandra Clare's City of Bones, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games, and a whole lot more, we can't seem to get tired of it? What if I tell you that I'm going to discuss the elements, the building blocks of stories used by these authors to create such masterpieces? But before that, let's take a recap, shall we? We have already discussed a few weeks ago about the difference between the narrative discourse and narrative plot. To refresh your minds, these are three explanations. Explanation 1. Whereas a story comprises what we might roughly think of as what certain characters do in a certain place at a certain time, the word discourse comprises the complex process of encoding that story, which involves choices of vocabulary, syntax, order of presentation or how the narrating voice is going to be oriented towards what is narrated and towards the implied audience. Explanation 2. Story is equal to the what of the narrative. Discourse is equal to the way. Explanation 3. The theory of narrative requires a distinction between what I shall call story, a sequence of actions or events conceived as independent, their manifestation in discourse, and what I shall call discourse is the discursive presentation or narration of events. To introduce everyone to our topic for today, this is Developments in Structural Narratology. You can all refer to Paul Simpson 2004 with his book entitled Stylistics. Props Morphology of the Folktale. Russian scholar Vladimir Propp 1928 published a morphology of a fairy tale, or for him, folktale. He extrapolated a blueprint of folktales from 115 stories from Russia. His blueprint captures all possible elements available to any fairy story. He was able to list 31 narrative functions, and 7 of these are basic types of character roles. The way Propp did this is that he isolated the recurring components of each fairy tale. Considering that the characters in every story are different, he argues that it is what the characters do that is important, not who does it or how it is done, which means that Propp's morphology of folktale are the rendered down version of narratives into their basic constituents, producing a narrative similar to morphology or how we create words. According to Propp, a tale usually begins with some sort of initial situation, after which some or all of the 31 narrative functions follow. The first function, for example, is where one of the members of the family, normally the character role of hero, absents himself from home. This is called abstentation. This may precipitate by the death of parents or by some similar calamity, whereupon the hero may go to war, to the forest, or even curiously, to work. The second narrative function involves an interdiction being addressed to the hero, normally taking the form of a warning that danger is present, including some instruction about what not to do. Following from the interdiction is the narrative function violation of the interdiction. For example, in the Walt Disney cartoon Beauty and the Beast warns Beauty not on any account to go into the west wing of the castle, which is the interdiction. And guess what? Beauty goes into the west wing of the castle.
harm.
Do you realize what you could have done?
Please, stop!
Get out!
No!
Get out!
The fourth of Prop's functions sees the arrival of the character role of villain. The villain attempts to make a reconnaissance on the hero, finding out his whereabouts or about some vulnerability and weakness, and thus the pattern of the model develops up to a total of 31 possible narrative plot function. Clearly, not all of the 31 plot advancing functions are present in every story. For example, in Disney, every plot is different, but those are realized very closely indeed with the key Proppian categories. The main issue is really about what makes a good story. Disney's cartoons draw out from a finite list of universalized functions, a specific selection of plot advancing devices. What is interesting is that even though their particular settings, dramatic personae, and historical periods may change, a great many Disney films work to the same basic plot typology. Since in Simpsons' book we had Harry Potter, let me give you another example. The book I chose to analyze using Proppian Morphology is Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. In the book, there had only been 20 functions I had identified. I'd like to reiterate that it's not necessary to use 31 functions. All you need is to make your plot interesting and create a great story. There are 4 main spheres I am going to introduce. First is the introduction, second is the body of the story, third is the donor series, and fourth is the hero's return. We are now discussing the first sphere of the story. The first sphere contains the introduction, which has 7 functions. The first function is abstentation. Percy Jackson was a demigod. His father was the god of the sea, Poseidon, while his mother was a mortal named Sally Jackson. Since he was still a baby, Percy had never seen the figure of his father. The only one who loved and cared for him was his mother. When Percy was 12, he could never escape what he really was, and his mom knew it. She sent him to Camp Half-Blood with Grover, Percy's best friend, who's actually a satyr. On the way to the camp, they were intercepted by the evil Minotaur. Percy fought the monster, but his mom vanished in the process. Percy had to go on and discover the new world of Greek gods, and half-bloods and monsters. The second function is interdiction. It is a request or an advice on a weakened form, according to Prop 1968. In The Lightning Thief, it is when Percy's mother warned him he should not look back as she was getting attacked by the Minotaur. Which brings us to the third function, which is the violation of the interdiction, or simply violation. In the third function, Percy looked back and saw his mom struggling. He violated the interdiction and tried to save his mom. The fourth function is an attempt of the villain to get reconnaissance. Reconnaissance has the purpose of finding out the location of what the villain wants. In this case, Percy is prophesied to be a strong hero. Although he doesn't know it yet, the villain is already plotting against him. At the first parts of the book, the villain is Hades. He sent the Minotaur to gather info about Percy or to spy on him, but when it couldn't beat the hero, Hades got Percy's mother instead. The fifth function is the delivery, or when the villain, Hades, successfully gets an information about his victim. The information that was identified was when Mrs. Dodds, Percy's old math teacher, which is also a monster, identified Percy as a half-blood. The sixth function is trickery. It is when the villain attempts to deceive his victim in order to take possession of him or of his belongings. So you see, the title of this book is The Lightning Thief. It is because Zeus's lightning bolt went missing after the Olympian gods meeting during winter solstice. At the same time, Hades' helm also vanished. Percy was the one who was blamed because of the pact the 3 major gods made, which is to never have demigod children again. But since Percy was a son of Poseidon, the other major gods, which are Zeus and Hades, accused Poseidon of treachery and made this an act of war. Ares, which is the god of war, became the villain in this stage. He was manipulated by the real villain, which is Kronos, through the dream that would make the 3 major gods fight each other in a war. Of course he wants that. So Ares hid both the lightning bolt and the helm of darkness to trigger a war and pin it to Percy Jackson. Since the villain, which is Ares, had successfully tricked the hero unintentionally did some tasks that helped the villain. This is the seventh function, which is complicity. During Percy's journey to Underworld, Ares had placed the lightning bolt on Percy's backpack. We are now in the second sphere of the story, which is the body. The eighth function, featured in the Lightning Thief, has two parts. It is villainy and lack. Villainy is when the villain causes harm or injury to one member of the family of the hero. As said before, Hades kidnapped Percy's mom because he thought Percy has his helm. Then Hades found out that Percy brought the lightning bolt of Zeus instead of his helm. Hades, enraged of how he seemed to have been threatened by Percy by bringing the lightning bolt, asserted his dominance by using it as a bargaining tool for Percy's mother. The second part of the eighth function is lack. It is when one member of the family, in this case are the Olympian gods, either lack something or desires to have something. Basically, Zeus lost his lightning bolt. Hades lost his helm and now wants Zeus' lightning bolt. And lastly, Ares desires to have war in his family. The ninth function is mediation or the connective incident. It is when the hero is either approached with a request and responds to it of his own accord or is commanded and dispatched. This function happened when Percy learned about his prophecy from Chiron. He was then introduced to the villainy or lack that existed and that became a way of him of finding out that his family or the Olympian gods had suffered or had even caught up in a misery. Chiron said further that perhaps it was Hades that took advantage of the war between the two other major gods, since Zeus's lightning bolt is stolen, for which Poseidon is blamed. Chiron thought that Hades stole the lightning bolt so that he can overpower Poseidon and Zeus while they are busy fighting each other. The 10th function is the counteraction. It is when the hero chooses positive action in the novel. It was explained that Percy decided to go to the underworld to retrieve the lightning bolt from Hades. Knowing that Hades lost his weapon, which is the helm, Percy deduced that perhaps it was not him that stole the ancient weapon, and realized that it was Ares who tricked them. The 11th function is departure. It's when Percy leaves home or Camp Half-Blood. Originally, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover, which are the questers, decided to go by plane. But since Zeus is angry at him, being the sky god and all, he decided to travel over land instead. So now, we are at the third sphere, which is the donor series. The 12th function is the first function of the donor. It was when the hero is tested, interrogated, attacked, and etc. in preparation for receiving either a magical event or a helper. In this case, Ares was the donor. He wanted Percy to do something for him, which is to get his shield in an abandoned water park. In return, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover get to have a transportation to Las Vegas, where the entrance to the underworld is located. The 13th function is the hero's reaction when the actions of the future donor surprises him. Percy thought it was easy to get the shield from the underwater park, but as he, Annabeth, and Grover went there to fulfill the mission Ares gave them, a bunch of traps were launched that almost made them fail the mission. The 14th function is the provision or the receipt of the magical agent. This happens when the hero gets the use of the magical agent. When Percy, Annabeth, and Grover managed to succeed in acquiring the shield Ares entrusted them, he gave them a blue nylon backpack with some clothes and drachma coins in it. They also had a ride towards Las Vegas. The 15th function is guidance. This is when the hero is transferred or reaches or is led to whereabouts of an object of search. This happened when the questers were able to reach Las Vegas through Ares' help. The 16th function is the struggle. This function happens when the hero and the villain join in direct combat. When Percy reaches the underworld, he meets Hades and he realized that someone tricked him by placing the lightning bolt in his backpack. Since it was Ares that gave him the backpack, he surmised that it was also Ares who tricked them. Percy got out of the underworld by promising Hades that his helm would be returned. Once on the surface, Percy looks for Ares and they join in a direct combat. The 17th function is branding or marking. This happens when the hero is branded. According to Prop 1968, branding usually happens when the hero receives a certain wound in some way or getting something that changed him. It could be permanent. It might be a wound that was given to the hero from the villain. It might also be owning magical items such as a ring, a scarf, and etc. In this case, Percy was able to wound Ares, but since they were fighting along the shore, every time Percy gets wounded, he immediately heals because water heals him. Therefore, a wound from the villain is not possible. However, Ares gave Percy a curse. He said that his weapon would fail him when he needed it the most, before he vanished into thin air after his defeat. The 18th function is victory. The villain is defeated. As mentioned in the 17th function, Ares was defeated by Percy. Percy was able to wound the god at the end of the duel, and many people and polices, and also some winged monsters had come to watch. Embarrassed enough, Ares cursed Percy and decided to leave the duel. The 19th function is called liquidation. This happens when the initial misfortune or lack is liquidated. The narrative reaches its peak in this function. So when Ares was beaten by Percy, Ares gave Percy the other missing item, which is Hades' helm. The winged creatures mentioned in the 18th function were Hades' subordinates. And so, when Ares surrendered with the helm, those winged creatures brought the helm back to Hades in the underworld. Percy also returned the lightning bolt to Zeus. All lackness had been liquidated. We have reached the fourth and the last sphere, and it is about the return of the hero. The last function, which is the 20th, is when the hero decides to come back home. After defeating Ares, Percy then went to Olympus for telling what actually happened to Zeus. After explaining to Zeus, it became clear who the mastermind behind all the chaos, which was Kronos. Then Percy returned to his home in Manhattan to meet his mother before going back to Camp Half-Blood. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end and the conclusion of my report, which is Developments in Structural Narratology. I hope you have learned something.